Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports, where we report on topics like the flagrant politicization of the U.S. justice system. And what a great time to be talking about that topic, since Donald Trump's first criminal trial just started this week in New York City. You know, the one about Stormy Daniels and the alleged hush money payment. Now, if you've been in a coma, this is actually one of multiple criminal cases facing Donald Trump. And today we're going to get into whether voters agree with Donald Trump that this one in particular is a politically motivated witch hunt. And make sure you also hold on to the end of the video because you're going to see one of the craziest signals I've ever seen in our polling. But first, I want to talk about the state of the race, the 2024 presidential election. And people who have watched our video may have seen this chart before, but what this essentially is the last 10 years of all of our presidential matchup polling, all of the polling about Donald Trump being president. And so the data in this chart represents over 93,000 US likely voter responses. The red and blue lines represent the 5-period moving average of our polling. And we did that to clean it up because these polls swing back and forth quite a bit. But what you're essentially seeing is instead of a bunch of 1,000 likely voter polls, more like large 5,000 likely voter polls. And we also put in yellow the final reported popular vote results. And as you can see, in 2016 and 2020, we absolutely nailed it. I don't see how we can be expected to have done any better. And if anything, our polling was more favorable to Biden than Trump in 2020, which is pretty crazy since everybody accuses us of being a right-wing pollster. But the news is how much of a swing there's been since 2020. Biden finished 2020 with 50% in our polling, and now he's flirting with 40%. And Donald Trump has been doing great the last couple of months, and he's up 3 or 4 points over where he was doing in our polling back in 2020. So the race has swung majorly in Donald Trump's favor, and this is with the same polling methodology, pretty much the same weighting, the same questions. Nothing has changed except Biden is now doing 12 to 13 points worse than he was 4 years ago. And to me, that's the story. If Biden is doing so bad in the polls, what's his response? It doesn't look like he's going to campaign heavily. He's not going to do a presidential debate. He doesn't really seem to have any agenda responses for the top 2 voter issues, the economy and the border. And in fact, if anything, he's visibly making things at the border worse and refusing to take action on it. Isn't that crazy considering that that's what voters tell us far and away is their number 2 highest issue? So it really does seem like Joe Biden's electoral strategy is to take Donald Trump out somehow with one of these criminal cases. But the truth is, voters appear to be seeing through it. Trump has called the prosecution in New York City part of a politically motivated witch hunt. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? 41% of U.S. likely voters strongly agree. And again, that's more people than Joe Biden has in our electoral matchup polls right now. Another 13% somewhat agree for a pretty strong majority of 54%. 9% somewhat disagree, and 31% strongly disagree. So only about 3 in 10 voters strongly disagree that Trump isn't the victim of a political witch hunt. And if you're doing the math, 54% to 40% is a 14-point margin, and that's quite a bit more than Trump was leading Biden in our latest polls. So either the polls have swung even more in Trump's favor, or quite a few people who say they would vote Biden think this is a political witch hunt. Now, before we get to the party numbers, I wanted to make a quick note about race. And Democrats really need to pay attention about how Black people are responding to polls right now. Black voters are actually split on this. 44% of them said that Donald Trump's case was a politically motivated witch hunt. And that's crazy because we used to reliably expect Black voters to support Democrat talking points and Democrat candidates by a 90 to 10 margin. Now, Donald Trump isn't doing that well with Black voters in a head-to-head matchup against Biden, but the margin Biden leads by is down to the 20s, and he risks losing more Black voters over issues like this. But here are the party numbers, and 85% of Republicans agree that it's a witch hunt. Only 10% disagree. Only 6% disagree strongly. And of course, Democrats don't think it's a witch hunt, but only 57% of them strongly disagree, and 25% of Democrats do agree with Donald Trump. But look at those independent numbers. A majority of independents, 54%, agree that Donald Trump is the victim of a witch hunt. and only 40% of them disagree. And keep in mind, Joe Biden ostensibly needs to win those people over. He really can't win the election without taking a majority of independent votes. Now, I wanted to take a quick moment to do a victory lap. We've been telling people for years that prosecuting Donald Trump would have ramifications. There were some hints way far back, like in August of 2022 after the Mar-a-Lago raid, where the FBI, for the very first time, lost its positive favorability rating with U.S. likely voters. And of course, a majority of voters in the same set of questions also said that the FBI was acting like Joe Biden's personal Gestapo. But quite a few times in the winter and early spring, we went on War Room even and said that there was going to be ramifications of pursuing these criminal cases. And I think, not coincidentally, in March of last year, when Donald Trump's first indictment came out, that's the month his campaign totally turned it around and materialized. All of a sudden, his favorability shot up, and he started running away with the GOP primary race, while simultaneously, Ron DeSantis' numbers just imploded. To me, this is the news of 2024. The Democrats have to be doing polling. They have to know that these criminal cases aren't playing well with independent and open-minded voters, but they either don't seem to care or they don't have any other strategy. Are they really going to make an end zone rush to try and take Donald Trump out of the race any way they can because they don't think they can win the race fairly? As a pollster trying to predict elections, I have to tell you, I have no idea what's going to happen. But what voters are saying is going to happen is that Donald Trump is not going to get a fair trial in New York City. Only 27% of them say it's very likely he'll get a fair trial, and another 15% say somewhat likely for 42%. 20% say not very likely, and 31% say not at all likely. So 42% to 51%. But if you were leading New York City, wouldn't you be kind of concerned that only 27% of likely voters across the entire country think that anyone is very likely to get a fair trial in your city? There's going to be ramifications for that. But here are the party numbers, and Republicans don't think he's going to get a fair trial, and Democrats do, but it's only 48% of Democrats. But look at independents. Independents are pretty much saying here that Donald Trump's not going to get a fair trial. It's 57%, a really strong majority. But here, to me, is the mind-blowing part. I searched through all of the demographics, and the number one demographic who is absolutely convinced that Donald Trump's getting a fair trial in New York City are people who strongly approve of the job that Joe Biden is doing as president. 81% of those people say it's very likely that Donald Trump's going to get a fair trial, and another 14% say somewhat likely, for a combined 95%. So basically, none of these people are entertaining at all the fact that Donald Trump might not get a fair trial. And obviously, Joe Biden's strong approvers are absolutely flipped, but nowhere near that 95% ideologically pure number. But I want to drive this home by going back to the first question, the witch hunt question. And what I've put up here are the results of that question segregated by whom people told us they voted for in the 2020 election. Amongst Trump 2020 voters, 74% of them strongly agree that it's a witch hunt, and another 16% somewhat agree, for a combined total of 90%. Keep that number in mind. Only 6% of them disagree, and only 2% strongly. Now look at Biden 2020 voters. 17% of them agree that this case is a witch hunt out to get Donald Trump. And 78% of them disagree, but only 65% of them disagree strongly. So here's my point. Obviously, we're seeing the signal we expect here. But the standout is how many people who voted for Biden in 2020 think that this case is a witch hunt. People are paying attention to what's happening in the Biden administration, some of them, and they're changing their mind, and they're going to vote Trump. And it's that final point I want to address, because we're getting a little bit of flack right now because of all the pollsters, we show Donald Trump with the biggest lead. Again, 8 points over Biden. And here's the thing about that. There are some other reasons why we show a little bit more lead. One of them is that we always poll likely voters because we think it's the most accurate way to predict elections, even though it's a little bit more expensive than the registered voter or all adult polling that other pollsters are using right now. And of course, they're all going to switch back in September to likely voter too. But I can't really explain the rest of it. To be honest with you, our methodology hasn't really changed. Our weightings only shifted like 1 point in Republicans' favor since the 2020 election. there's no reason that Donald Trump has this much of a lead in our polls other than that people have told us that they've changed their mind. Is Donald Trump going to keep this massive lead? I don't know. It's hard to tell. A lot of it depends on September and October surprises, and of course, billions of dollars that are dumped into advertising, and also, of course, electioneering. But looking at these numbers with a 13-point shift since the 2020 election, it's hard to say anything other than Joe Biden is absolutely going to lose, at least at this point in time. And what's he doing to turn it around other than seemingly just to indict Trump? If you want to follow along on that journey with us, please subscribe at YouTube or Rumble, like the video while you're there, follow us on Twitter at Rasmussen_poll, and thanks for watching.